Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's going to be one of those sessions. Welcome to the launch of the Future Business District reports. I'm Kevin Johnson, and I've acted rather badly as the project director for the last few months of this, and it's my duty to try and guide you through the proceedings. People, presentations, panels. It's been a while. Here we are. 18 months ago, you may have been bored of them. Now, they're quite unique and original. I hope you enjoy. This is not Zoom. This is for real, people. Welcome, and thank you for finding your way here. We've missed these kind of events so much that we invited you to one venue on the other side of the Colmore district, and then we brought you to a venue which is actually in the retail bid district. That shows you just how interconnected this project has been. But we promise this event will be fun. It's about the future, and it's going to be a conversation. So now is the time to leave if you don't want to be involved in a conversation. If you are into social media and such things, the hashtag is FBD2021. FBD2021. If you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. It's passed you by already. I should also warn you that this event is being recorded. If you're not supposed to be here, you're supposed to be with somebody else. Now is the time to put something over your face. Now, ahead of us in the next 3 hours, only 712 slides to go. Don't worry, there's more Prosecco at the end. Ahead of you is the leader of the council, Ian Ward, who's with us, the artists formerly known as Professor Green and Riley Research, one of you rap fans out there. And then we are going to unwrap Colmore BID's response to the research, which you're going to hear about, with the help of, it says here, an esteemed panel. The final word will go to the boss, Nicola Fleet-Milne, who said to me last night that she is doing the speech, which is not so much the best man speech, but the father of the bride's turn. She is also the last thing standing between you and a sausage roll, so I know she'll be brief. But first, to my partner in crime in this endeavour, to properly introduce what Future Business District, I can't even say it, Future Business District is all about. Please welcome Mike Best.
Thanks, Kevin, and I'll probably also stumble over Future Business District, but I got that one out, so that's a start. Right, so this study started life last summer when it was already evident that the first lockdown and the requirement to work from home if you can would have far-reaching consequences for city centres. We've since had another lockdown, and even though restrictions have been easing since April and vaccination rollout has been a success, the forced experiment is still here a year on. Office occupancy is around about 40%, we believe, and the Centre for Cities report that footfall in Birmingham city centre is still only 53% of pre-pandemic levels at the end of August, although spending has been recovering in the nighttime and weekend economies, or at least that's what Nicola's telling me. All the surveys, whether it's in the BBC, City AM yesterday, show that office workers don't want to return to the commute 5 days a week. Hybrid is here to stay, and where to work has become a matter of choice. This means business districts are facing a bit of an existential crisis. However, COVID-19 has only had a supercharging effect on many of the underlying trends that were already reshaping our city centres. So we decided to commission a study to take a step back, not to focus on the immediate return after the pandemic, but to look at the longer term impacts and how we respond as a business community and as a city. The study asked two basic questions, and most importantly decided to ask a wider audience, not just the business community or senior leaders, but our fellow bids, and then run it past a diverse advisory panel drawn from wider society. And the more we talked and listened, the more we rejected the simple notion of come back to save Prets. It became more about a refresh of the business case for business districts and moving the conversation from what can you do for the city centre to what can the city centre do for you. You'll hear a lot about curation today, and we decided to curate the Future Business District study ourselves with Kevin as project director, and support from our partners in the public sector, and you'll hear from Ian shortly, commercial backing from MEPC and Balfour Beatty, to which we're very grateful, and all of our city centre bid partners. We commissioned our core research from City Ready, WM Ready at the University of Birmingham, and you'll hear from Rebecca and Anne later as they unpack their findings. And then we set up an advisory panel chaired by Alex Bishop of Shoesmiths to test and challenge those findings and assist us in developing our response. Some of them are here today and on the panel that you'll hear from later. So today we're publishing both the research report in full and in its summary form, and our response, which we're calling The Space Between. There are copies here and there'll be a website too. The response has been discussed and agreed by the board of Colmore BID and shared with our partners, including all BIDs and the City Centre Strategic Partnership. It sets out a vision for the future business district and how we might curate the space between, not just in Colmore, but across the wider city centre. Kevin will introduce the big ideas and interventions we're proposing later on, and the panel will get to discuss them, so I'm not going to cover them now. But from that first image of an empty Victoria Square to this one, which shows Summer in the Square event, which we organised earlier in the year, we've a high degree of confidence for the future business district. The attractiveness of cities and the advantages of clustering highly skilled workers where they can collaborate and collect remains very strong. However, hybrid working is here to stay, and at 3 levels, at the office, at the business district and the wider city centre. So we need to embrace it and turn it into a positive, make Birmingham the best place for flexible working, the most welcoming, the most inclusive and the safest, and ensure the future success of the business district is a win-win for the city and the region, not a binary choice between the places we choose to work and live. So with that wider canvas in mind, I'll hand over in a moment to Ian Ward to talk about the study in the wider context of what the city are doing. But we look forward to sharing our thinking and ideas with you today and invite you to be part of the conversation as we turn those ideas into action. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now, last week we heard about the untimely passing of the former deputy leader of the council, Andy Howell. When Mike and I were setting up this project about a year ago, he was one of the first people I spoke to about it. When I say spoke to, we had about 3 pints in the old joint stock to talk about it. A couple of days later, he sent me an email, a long missive. For those of you who know Andy, they're long missives and they're full of typos. But I thought I'd read you out a couple of lines that he sent me almost a year to the date. Almost certainly, he said, larger companies will rethink their space requirements. I'm not sure about everyone working from home, but I think flexible patterns may well mean office working is limited to 1 or 2 days a week. But residential can't fill this gap unless we are clearer about the need to develop a proper social infrastructure in these areas. He said centres are places of work, except they may not be quite as much as they were. Centres are places of leisure, hospitality and cultural enrichment. You are right, he said, to flag up culture, but we need some real investment in quality to see a real difference. I guess the main challenge, he concluded early on, is to strike the right kind of balance without being focused on complacency on the one hand or prophecies of doom on the other. I would suggest that a spirit of curiosity is pretty important. I hope we've done that. Andy would have loved this. Local politicians, officers, academics, business people, cultural leaders and others in a room talking about ideas, talking about the future, and most importantly, a good gossip over a drink at the end. Andy didn't quite make it to leader, but one of his successors did make the step up from deputy to leader, so it's particularly good, I think, that we have the leader of the council with us today. Please welcome Ian Ward.
Thank you very much. Andy Howell will certainly be missed in this city. When I was first elected to Birmingham City Council, he was one of the senior politicians on the City Council. And as I began my political journey with the council, certainly I'm indebted to Andy for helping me along the way. And I don't think I would be standing here today as the leader of Birmingham City Council had it not been for the help that Andy gave me, particularly towards the end of the 1990s and the first few years of this century. And I'll always be grateful for that help. As I say, he is a giant in this city and he will definitely be missed. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by thanking the BID for inviting me along to the launch of this exciting and timely report. I say timely because we all know city centres and business districts have faced unprecedented challenges over the last 18 months. The world has changed. The post-COVID landscape for city centres and business districts will be very different to what existed before the spring of 2020. And anyone thinking we can simply go back to the way things were is in for a very rude awakening. Thankfully, the Future Business District study, The Space Between, doesn't merely reflect the changing landscape, it embraces it and sets out a vision for an exciting future where the Colmore Business District, and therefore Birmingham, will not merely survive, but will thrive. To do so, we need to be ahead of the game. And it speaks volumes about the foresight of Colmore BID and the partnership approach in our city that at a time when other cities are just beginning this conversation, Birmingham already has a report that doesn't simply identify emerging issues, it maps out how we will respond. As the report states, the business quarter will continue to thrive by curating the space between that gives Colmore life and makes it attractive to businesses, professionals and visitors. That phrase, the space between, describes the areas used to move, connect and recharge, including transport hubs and routes, open and green spaces, cultural and hospitality spots, all of which are essential to supporting business within the workplace. This is the all-important added value, the stuff that helps Birmingham to stand out from the crowd, the attention to detail that will lead to investment, jobs and opportunities for our city. Now, last week, I welcomed a number of major developers and investors to Birmingham to outline what our city has to offer and explain why Birmingham continues to be the place to live, work and invest. As you all know, that's not the hard sell it might once have been. Prior to COVID, Birmingham was seeing growth at almost twice the rate of London and 4 times the national average. And while the pandemic has had a profound impact both economically and socially, the factors that made Birmingham such an attractive place to live, work and invest 18 months ago remain in place and will now help power our recovery. When discussing our vision for Birmingham's future growth, I reflected that the nature of economic development is clearly shifting from business location and business attraction, where the jobs are, to talent and talent attraction, where the people are. So we need to be creating the types of places where people want to be, places that attract and, even more importantly, retain businesses and talent. That was an important element of the vision outlined in our Future City Plan, launched in January of this year. And this study, focusing as it does on the 3 C's, curate, collaborate and connect, can be seen as a blueprint for doing exactly that. After a year and a half of meetings on Zoom, Teams and other virtual platforms, people are slowly returning to the office. But the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 routine, week in, week out, is unlikely to return to its pre-pandemic levels. As this report launched today reflects, hybrid working is here to stay. The irreversible trend for some people is to work from city centre offices on fewer days a week. We can either rail against the inevitable or harness the opportunity to make Birmingham City Centre the home of hybrid. I'm pleased to say that this report takes the latter, far more pragmatic approach and identifies the current period of transformation and reinvention as an opportunity to open, diversify and grow the business district. It sets out a very clear ambition for Birmingham to become the best city from which to work flexibly by optimising the use of workspaces to make the business district more inclusive and welcoming for startups, freelancers and social enterprises. As the report states, we must and will create a flexible business district for an agile workforce. In addition to that flexibility, what will the key ingredients be for a successful business district in the post-pandemic recovery and beyond? This is, of course, a competitive space, and we must work collaboratively to deliver an unrivaled urban experience across the city centre, combining retail, leisure and culture, featuring more independence and further developing our cafe culture. We must also continue to invest in high-quality public realm and green spaces to support well-being and sustainability. And last Friday, I welcomed Northern Powerhouse Partnership Director Henry Murison to Birmingham, and he was amazed at the ongoing transformation of our city. Not just the exciting new buildings, but the reimagining of our public open spaces. Birmingham has come a long way in recent years, and our challenge, as this study rightly acknowledges, is to continue that journey. As I said earlier, this is about creating the type of places where people, businesses and organisations want to be. So the space between is right to focus on the increasing importance of culture to attract and sustain firms, professionals and visitors. This must be the place to connect, and in order to attract people back and keep them returning, we must develop an even stronger leisure offer and more cultural experiences. To that end, I'm excited by the idea of a Curator General, although that title does keep putting me in mind of the Witchfinder General. But seriously, it strikes me as an eminently sensible and forward-thinking to create a new role for the city centre, targeting and welcoming new entrants, acting as creative director, commissioning events and festivals, and shaping public realm and green spaces. So the council will work with the city centre partners to explore how this role could help Birmingham stand out, making our city an ever more attractive proposition. In more general terms, working together will be key to our future success. We all know that collaboration is more important than ever if we're going to create a future Birmingham in which our people, communities and businesses all thrive. Earlier, I mentioned our future city plan, a vision developing Birmingham over the next 20 years that sets out our ambitions for a green, livable and globally leading city that responds to economic, social and environmental conditions. And in the spirit of collaboration, the council will not deliver on our future city plan in isolation. To be frank, I don't want us to. We must and will incorporate the work of our partners, with the space between being a perfect example to ensure that together we deliver on what I firmly still believe will be a golden decade of opportunity and prosperity for the people, communities and businesses of Birmingham. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. You should know that Mike has already bought the Witchfinder hat. And I know you do have to leave soon, Ian, so thank you for coming. And Ian, I don't think Ian is going to be walking out on the research. Ian has to get to another appointment. So thank you very much. So to the research. By the way, we're getting near to questions and discussions. So only one more thing to talk at you, then it's open house-ish. To the research. Now, we wanted the best possible presenters for this slot. But I'm doing it. But the pint-sized Geordie duo were not available. But we do have the next best thing. No, not Ant and Dec, but Anne and Beck. Come on, you've not been out for 18 months. Thank you, Martin. With your Wednesday afternoon research takeaway, there will be Rebecca Riley, but first up is Professor Green herself, Anne Green.
Okay, so you've got me starting off, and I'm going to outline some of the findings from our study, and Becky's going to wave it in the air. This is what it looks like in paper, but you will be able to download it from the web or read it on the web, in fact. So, what's the methodology for our study? How did we go about this? So that's it. What we did had two phases. We started off with a research phase where we did an evidence review of the academic and grey literature. We analysed secondary data sources and we did some economic modelling amongst that. We held a series of 7 workshops on megatrends. We issued a call for evidence to enable people, whether they're businesses, stakeholders and others, to give their views on future trends. So that was the first stage. And then very importantly, we had a phase of engagement where we went and did some in-depth interviews. So thank you for people who I've met for the first time in real life today, but have spoken to you virtually. We engaged with the community panel, asking them about working patterns and about the broader use of city centres. We held some focused discussions on infrastructure, place and urban experience, and we also had meetings with individuals. So this was all quite broad-ranging over the months of 2021. So from our evidence review then. Our evidence review was wide-ranging, and here I'm just concentrating on two aspects, the first being historical perspectives and then evolution of cities. And it's easy to think that the events of the last 19 months have been unprecedented, but actually if you look back in history, we've seen these sorts of things before. We've had the Black Death in medieval times. In the time of Shakespeare, I hadn't realised that the theatres were shut for years when he was at his prime. We've heard more about the Spanish flu about 100 years ago. Since then, in this century, we've had SARS and swine flu. I think, though, this is for many of us has been the first big experience of something like this. And what we learn from the past is that they have social, economic and political impacts, but also that in the past and as now, we have had developments in medicine. But what's different this time in terms of thinking about how we rebound or come back to life or whatever, is we have this time internet and digital technologies that have the potential to substitute for face-to-face interaction in the days that Shakespeare perhaps did not have. And economic geographers, though, tend to think that the agglomeration advantages of cities are likely to be sustained going forward. This is the importance of coming together to collaborate for knowledge creation, etc. Some of the things that you can't quite do quite as well over Zoom or Teams. But we've also seen, I think, interestingly, more engagement with the local. So we hear about things like 20-minute neighbourhoods and 15-minute cities. So these two trends, the sort of agglomeration economies and the greater fascination with the local go hand in hand. We also had then a series of megatrends. We did some workshops on megatrends. Now, these are things that have big, large-scale trends that have an impact on economy and society. So you can think of things like carbon net zero. You can think of technological developments, etc. On this slide, I outlined some of the major things that came through a series of 7 workshops we had that looked at things like mobilities, health, hybrid working, business models, attitudes and behaviours. And I've highlighted 4 here. Hybrid working, which has already been spoken about. Also work reimagined, the issue that people have perhaps had more time to reflect, at least some of them have, and think, what do they want from work? What do they want from life? The issue of the urban experience economy came through most of our workshops, and also perhaps highlighting the green issues, the fact that cities are for people and not cars. So I'm going to hand over to Beck now, who's going to just tell you about the rest of our research.
So the next few slides, I'm just going to recap on the element of the work that where we interviewed many of you in the room, as Anne highlighted. I think the first thing to say, in terms of those interviews, what came across quite strongly from all the senior leaders in Birmingham was the fact that they cared very much about their employees. And that return to work, what featured in that was mental health, making sure people were happy in their work, and that they accommodated things like care, etc., that have become more important. So I think that's a good reflection on the sector, really. I think in terms of those insights, Anne and myself have done work with this sector quite a few times now. This is the 3rd time round. And actually what we saw was that some of the things that we were talking about 2-3 years ago had become even more important. So the agile, flexible working, that has accelerated, but it was there before. And what we've seen is the change that in the last 2 years, we could have expected to happen in the next 10. but it's all been compacted. So actually for this sector, there's a lot of resilience in there because you were prepared for that change and you were preparing. The issue about the office being a social place, and I think that's quite key in terms of attracting your workers back into the office, but making that time worthwhile and useful to their day job. And I think it's yet to be seen how it will all pan out. I think if we continue with the Zoom, that might threaten that. The issue as well around how do you bring people back into the office, you have to have a greater attraction of the reasons for coming in, which is where all the nighttime economy, the hospitality and the leisure becomes even more important in these circumstances, giving people reason to come in. And I think what came through in this work, and we also did some citizens' work, so we asked citizens about returning to the cities and what was stopping them. And actually safety and security was their biggest thing on their list. Because coming into an environment like that, I'm sure this morning we all thought, do we really want to be in a room with 80 other people? That is going to be prevalent for some time. And we have to do something to help people come back safely. That's also important for inward investors in terms of the transport infrastructure. Is it safe and reliable and can it get us round? And also in terms of, as the comment says, we've come a long way on what we've done in terms of our transport, but there's a lot more to do. And then finally, in terms of the quotes that we've got on the screen, this green spaces and corporate social responsibility came through interviews a lot within this sector. So how do we create a good environment that people are happy to be in, surrounded by as much green as we possibly can, and also this social responsibility in terms of both to our employees and to the city, because there was an awful lot of love for the city within these interviews. Where we took this work actually was trying to work out where we might end up, and we ended up with this chart really, which is looking at the two big things that we thought would happen and affect the city over the next sort of 10, 15 years. And that was footfall in terms of retail leisure, as we just discussed, and also footfall in terms of working. And we ended up with these two axes. And these two axes give you 4 potential futures. And they're deliberately divisive. They're deliberately extreme. And so we've got City Playground, which is where we develop the culture and leisure facilities to an extreme that's what we offer. A good example of that would be Vegas sort of idea. Roaring 20s, which is basically looking back to what happened actually after the 1918 pandemic, is all that pent-up consumer spend all released at once. And that's potential now, because we already know we've got a lot of consumer spend ready to go. But it also, in terms of that one, creates an awful lot of diversity and inequality issues. So the haves, they gain, the have-nots get left behind. The other one with this one, because we did model these, and we have got numbers behind this to tell you what the shift and share in terms of employment, etc., happens. In this one as well, emissions go through the roof. So it's not good for your green. And then the next one is worker bees, which is the return of the office worker en masse. So effectively, the district would grow, and that was what would happen, and it squeezes out everything else. So at night, the city becomes a ghost town. And some people in the workshops and discussions said that might be what Birmingham was like 20, 25 years ago. And then ghost town is effectively what we've had for the last 18 months. Nobody here, nobody working here. I can say in terms of the discussions that we had with the steering group, effectively what we thought was we were in the middle at the moment. We were in the middle when we started. We went down to the ghost town sort of last year, and now we want to get up somewhere between those top two. And I think the thing to bear in mind with these forecasts and the work that we've done is there are positives and negatives in all of these scenarios. And any planning that's done, and this is where the space between comes in, that's about the risks and de-risking and looking at what actions we need to take. So the conclusions of the work then, as Anne mentioned, digital transformation has really accelerated in the last couple of years. And that tech disruption will continue to impact, and it will impact business models. And this sector, the bid area, will not be left unmarked by that. Hybrid working here to stay. Again, nobody really knows how that will work and how that will pan out, but definitely everybody's agreeing that that's what they're working towards, if not already. Critically, access to talent is going to get more problematic. I mean, it's already an issue, but actually, all of a sudden, our labour pools are much bigger. People can recruit from all of the country and work for you. And likewise, we can do the same. So connecting, interacting, collaborating, and creating an urban experience that attracts professional staff into the area is critical. And in terms of safety, I've already mentioned that, but it's actually gone up the agenda a lot more than it was before. And lastly, there will be an increasing demand for recognising social value from both your employees and from employers, actually. A lot of buy-in from that. Climate change and inclusivity is a big issue, and we'll have to tackle it. And the potential is with this sector is you could all go working from home and it doesn't really matter, but actually it is a key problem. I think the other thing is that our consumers, our clients, our employees, all those things matter to them. And if we don't pay attention to them, then we risk our customer base and our client base.
Thanks very much. Now, Ant and Dec, Anne and Beck, please do come up, grab a microphone. Questions, ladies and gentlemen. This is the time. We've talked at you for long enough. I'm looking at you, Henrietta. We've talked at you for long enough, so I'm going to try and unpack what we mean by the space between a little bit more and some of the ideas in there, not only Mike's Witchfinder General. So questions in terms of unpacking our research. Henrietta, I knew you would be first. And if you could just do a very quick name and patron.
I also knew you'd pick on me, Kevin, so I thought I'd volunteer. I'm Henrietta, I'm Chief Executive of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. One thing we're hearing increasingly from businesses at the moment is concern about rising costs of doing business. You know, everything we're seeing in the headlines, from sort of wage inflation through to sort of inflated prices due to supply chain disruption, on and on and on. As we know, city centres are typically more expensive. They're more expensive places to rent, and also very expensive in terms of business rates. Did that come up at all in your research, concerns about the cost of doing business in city centres? And also that question around rents, they're a factor of demand, rates, they're a choice of government. Is there an opportunity, do you think, to sort of push for that review of business rates and thinking differently about how we tax businesses that want to invest in city centres?
Go on, Beck.
I would say that things like business rates didn't particularly come up in the interviews that we did. What did come up is, as you pointed out, the wage issues. So as we've already got a constrained labour market, so we high employment, low unemployment, surprisingly, after a pandemic, and that has created a bottleneck in terms of talent and skills. And I think that that's what people were more concerned about, particularly in these interviews, was how do we attract and retain that talent pool, because we were having problems already. So I think that was the main issue, but that's probably a mix of the interviews that we had rather than the broader set of businesses.
Can I just add to that? I think we're in what we've seen over the period we've been doing this is like a journey. And some things rise up in importance and then shift back a bit and then go up a bit. So I think we are on this journey, and I think the issues that you've raised are ones that are in the ascendancy at the moment. And I think we do have to remember this, and planning ahead and going forward. This is a moving situation, and it will remain in that way dynamic. Yeah.
Other questions? Sir, that's a half a hand and it's going all the way, sir. And name and patron, if you would, sir.
Hello, my name's Young. I'm a strategic consultant from Jacobs. We've heard there's a lot of fear, particularly talent and rising costs. But what are the sort of short-term goals that us as businesses, or even long-term strategies that we can do to support this sort of new change and growth within Birmingham?
Anne, do you want to start?
Quite a big question. What can you do in the term to support growth? I think it's just really, in part, trying to be as open and inclusive as possible. I think just to try and do things, perhaps it's very easy to get stuck in ways of doing things and recruit in ways you always have. But I think it's opening up to new potential and doing things differently. And I think actually one thing the pandemic has done is that it has opened people's mindsets in many, many different ways. And I think it's kind of keeping that open mind and thinking, well, we're in a new way, let's be open to trying new things. So I think that's at least a start of an answer to that.
Okay, so at the back, on the back row.
I'm Christopher Turner. I run British BID, which is the group that looks after business and groups. I asked this question because I'm in the middle of Birmingham. And Birmingham, 150 odd years ago, was the leader in public infrastructure, in housing, in transport. And I think the thing we're all finding now is ignoring all the issues about business rates. One of the big problems, I think, is about housing, is about transport, is making places affordable so that business can prosper. Businesses come to towns if they can get good schooling, if their employees can be trained, educated, and that joining up of the public-private debate is something we're starting to sense around the world, to be honest. And I'm just wondering if the project took that up and whether the council here is enthused by that agenda or not.
The council leader's gone, so he can't answer, but I will ask Beck, and I'm sure you're thinking particularly about the scenarios and the work that you did around rent and transport, housing, etc.
Yeah, so when we did the scenarios and we looked at those positive and negative effects, and they're sort of highlighted in the quadrants, because some get worse, some get better in terms of what you've said. But I think we've also used the same model just to look at the growth and what's driving that, and actually that model is saying that the growth in the region and in Birmingham will be lower than it was going into the pandemic. So Oxford are predicting a structural shift. And what's driving that, one of the things driving that is that they are predicting that there will be a reduction in infrastructure spend, which is all the things that you're talking about. And actually that a lot of the growth that Birmingham saw before the pandemic was driven by that infrastructure spend. The redesign of the city, the transport infrastructure, etc. So at the moment, forecasters are baking that reduction in. So there is a challenge about how do you attract more spend into Birmingham to maintain that investment in the longer term, and what can we all do to do that? Okay,
Rob, thank you.
Rob McPherson. I run the Impact Arts Consultancy now, but pre-pandemic I was at Birmingham Hippodrome. So I know some of the facts there. 60% of Birmingham Hippodrome's audience came from outside the city, in fact much more from the surrounding Shire counties. So the arts generally in the city were responsible for bringing in vast numbers of non-Brummies. And whilst there was a cohort of audience regularly coming from the city centre, staying later in the evening, as I'm sure everyone has done in this room, the vast majority are moving into the city, and that's what's attracting that kind of investment that you're talking about. I'm old enough to remember when Arts and Business used to do this scheme whereby corporate sponsorship was matched with government money through DCMS. Is there any appetite in the research that you've done for hard-pressed businesses who are already struggling with their own finances to look upon those kinds of schemes favourably, where perhaps corporate sponsorship could help the arts organisations come back to life more quickly?
Anne, your turn.
Yeah, I think you've missed out the artist here amongst us, but I think that there is certainly a strong recognition about the interdependencies of the different sectors, and that one sector thriving will help another. And I think the issue about the role of the cultural sector in its broadest sense, bringing people in, I think was very much recognised. But I defer to my more artist colleague to say anything else.
I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think the problem is with the arts and culture is it's overlooked when we're planning in this sense, especially the relationship that it has to other sectors. And I think what was recognised in this research and with the steering group is actually it's arts and culture as an enabler to get your workers back in, not just so that they're back in, but actually because of concerns about mental health, about concerns about corporate stickiness, feeling like you belong. And there is a place for creative and cultural experiences within that. And I think there is, because of the interviews that we did, because there is that knowledge now and understanding of the importance and benefits of it, I think it would be a good point to be going back to businesses and thinking about that and saying, what can we do? How can we do that corporate sponsorship type activity?
Oh, great. Okay, I'm going to do one final question for each of you, and then we should move on, talk about the space between in a bit more detail, get our panel up. Becky, you mentioned in your presentation, I think in passing, about hybrid is here to stay, which is one of the things that we're sort of broadly saying today, but there's a sort of but connected to that. I think particularly you referenced about, if we've got to do our Zoom team meetings in an office, etc. What's your sense and what does the data tell you?
I mean, I think it certainly in terms of the interviews that we did, the perception was that it was here to stay, and businesses were already re-engineering to cope with that. Now, whether that continues and whether it works is a different thing, because we're all going to be making individual decisions every day now, and we'll see how it pans out. I do think that there will be a greater focus on, when you are in the office, that it's useful and that it makes a difference to your job, which I think will continue to re-engineer the way we do things constantly, and it'll probably be a constant flux. And some businesses will err more towards that, others won't. I'm aware that there are lots of businesses that are already moving out of properties, for instance. So that shift's happening. Whether it sticks or not, I think will actually come down to the practicalities of the technology versus what individuals really want in terms of contact with other people.
Okay, and Anne, you touched on people are on a journey. We've been on a journey in terms of doing this study. What's the main surprise that has, in the last 9 to 12 months? What's been the biggest surprise in doing this work?
Oh, it's very difficult. I think one of the biggest surprises is that we're continuing to learn and we're continuing to find out new things. So I think it's very important going forward that we continue that spirit of engagement. And I think it's not necessarily a surprise, but perhaps the degree to which people are really behind trying to make a success of the Birmingham city centre. I mean, it's not a surprise, but I think it's how strong it was. Probably was greater than I perhaps at first envisaged.
Great. Thank you very much. Rebecca, Riley and Green, thanks very much. So the task from the research was to take forward those conclusions and the recommendations that Anne and Rebecca and the team laid out to us, and to work out what they meant in the medium term and what did we need to do to make the business district fit for the future. And we called upon the advisory panel, we called upon the steering group of the board, our partners, our wider stakeholders, and of course many of you in this room. And the basis of 6 pillars quickly emerged, broadly in line with the research conclusions and trends. These pillars provided the foundation upon which to develop actions that might address the challenges and opportunities that the research had given us. Linking them together was a simple idea. Like so much, it emerged from our advisory panel. It was nothing particularly new, but was something that has taken a greater meaning, added importance. We know the workspace, the office, is of course significant. Indeed, we have plans to showcase modern workplaces and all that go with them today. But as you've already heard today, it is the space between that makes a big difference. The areas, as Ian talked about earlier, that are used to move, connect and recharge, including transport hubs and routes, open and green places, cultural and hospitality hotspots, which are essential to supporting business and economic activity within the workplace. Often, it's these hidden, meanwhile unrecognised spaces that characterise a place, make it attractive to businesses and individuals, and, crucially given our collective experience of lockdown, support well-being. Colmore District, we think, will continue to thrive by curating the space between that gives Colmore life and makes it attractive to businesses, to professionals and to visitors. And these then are the 6 pillars: connections and culture, agile and flexible, Colmore collaborates, on the move, safe and sound and open to all. Let me just quickly run you through what we think they mean, and then we're going to get our panel up. Culture and connections, which we've talked about a lot already today. Business districts and wider centres are places to connect, to meet, to exchange. What Andy Howell told me, our centres are places of leisure and hospitality and cultural enrichment. But they need more proactive curation. In other words, expert selection and organisation. Agile and flexible. Leading firms are already becoming more agile and flexible. You saw that in the research. So must their business environment. Hybrid is here, we think. So let's harness it and make Birmingham city centre the home of hybrid. Colmore collaborates. Spaces are becoming less about desk farms and more about collaboration. Investors, landlords, occupiers all want more from their surrounding environment, as we've already touched on. We want to widen collaboration, share information better, and create new opportunities. Time and again, we were told the city centre does not yet have a modern integrated transport system, especially not one that can support an economy driven increasingly by culture and hospitality, especially at night time. We need to support the work of plans and investment bids being managed by or being made by the City Council and by Transport for West Midlands and the Combined Authority. Safe and sound is the fastest mover on the charts. Transport is the big one, but concerns about public and office spaces have risen markedly too. And finally, of the pillars, open to all. Open to more people, open to new types of business, open to independence, breaking down invisible barriers to citizens of our own city, opening up spaces. COVID unlocking should also mean Colmore opening up. So these are the 6 pillars as they appear in our report. Our vision is for the space between. That Colmore District will continue to thrive, but will need more active curation. That hybrid is here. Let's harness it and make the city centre the home of hybrid. And as people work from the city centre offices on fewer days a week, we'll take the opportunity to open up, diversify and grow the area. So to try and make some meaning of that and to try and get your thoughts and input to it, we're going to bring up our panel. And in this order, perhaps if you could help me by sitting left to right as you look at it in this order. The man at the steering wheel himself, Mr. Mike Best. You get a round of applause. Look at that. Anita Barlow, who I have down here as the chair of B Music, but has more titles than a queen. Literally, she is Wonder Woman. She has the picture on her office wall at home. I've seen it. Alex Bishop. A man direct from paradise, Rob Groves. A man who is a developer, so his Twitter profile tells me, a developer, an architect, an innovator. He has more changes of titles than even Anita does. It is Martin Prince Parrott. Anita, interim chair soon of GB SLEP, I have to say that. Cultural lead of LEP and all manner of other things as well. Let's start with culture. What have we learned from? What are the opportunities for culture coming out of the pandemic?
Okay, I mean, it's a no-brainer. No city is going to recover or grow without culture. It's taken us the journey of the LEP, and look at the investment that the LEP has put into culture and creative economy, because we realise the GVA and the hard cash the culture brings in is a no-brainer. I don't think anybody in this room needs to be convinced of that, do we? No, so let's move on to some of the thorny...
Could I actually inquire what you mean by culture? Would it be more value orientated or association football orientated? Which end of the spectrum is culture regarded as?
Okay, well, I take encompassing all cultures. I mean, to me, sport is a cultural endeavour. So it's from somebody who's the busker out there to sports. And I put arts and culture at the heart of the creative economy. I think one of our success stories in the GBS LEP area was that right from the start, when I joined the board, I didn't, to represent and lead on arts and culture, I didn't leave arts and culture and sport and Commonwealth Games out there. It became part of the creative economy, which is why I think we've taken that growth very seriously. So you only have to look at the investment that the Combined Authority and the LEP have put in and how other LEPs have led on from that. Can I move on to a few of the thorny issues there?
Thank you, my colleague. That was my colleague, ladies and gentlemen.
Right. The space between isn't going to work if we are not inclusive. And I think that's really, really important. And if you pardon the pun, the city playground can't be dismissed as child's play because it's got to be worked at. If we're serious about developing that playground, then we've got to think about serious investment. We've got to think about the social impact of that. We could have a lovely, lovely bid area that doesn't talk to our wider communities, to our wider neighbourhoods, to the placemaking agenda that exists in Borsal Heath or Small Heath, etc. So the challenge to the business community is, if we are really creating that space between, how do we bring in our neighbourhoods into that conversation? Rob, you remember the days when all of our arts organisations had to work in the neighbourhoods to get city council funding. Now, I would throw out a challenge to the business community here. Can we come up with a model along those lines where we really engage with our communities, so the inequalities that have been so badly exposed, and we've always known they've been there during COVID, we can use culture as a way of maybe addressing some of those. Digbeth, if I dare talk about Digbeth, we've invested a lot again as a LEP in Digbeth, but it's an interesting area that's growing, that needs this infrastructure to develop, that needs better transport, but that's bringing housing in. And again, investment from the LEP into arts and culture is crucial to ensure that as HS2 and others come in, that grows. We've had culture action zones that have come up. I didn't really, Shanaz is here, my colleague. Did we get one from Colmore BID? I don't think we did. So the culture action zones is that we take areas and where business and partnerships work together with everyone, public, private, and develop action zones and grow culture out of that. So how are we going to do this? I think the Curator General idea is terrific, but my challenge to that Curator General idea would be, yes, but let's work in the neighbourhoods. We've got festivals that need to come into this area. And you only have to go to places in Europe. I was very fortunate in my BBC hat to see every street corner having a bit of culture. So if you're coming out at lunchtime for your sandwich, go and have a bit of culture as well. There are so many ideas, but our research has shown at the LEP that our inward investment has come about as part because of our richness, our cultural offering. So let's not lose sight of that as we go towards the Commonwealth Games. I'll shut up because I think there are a few challenges there.
Thank you. We may come back to. I'm looking for questions as we go, so don't rely on me to make the most of this panel and make them work. Alex, I'm going to come to you next. The chair of our advisory panel and a few of those members here with us this evening. So we talked about hybrid a fair amount, and Rebecca's sort of padded that out a little bit in terms of where we are on it. It's a nice phrase. What does it actually mean, and how are you, do you think, making it work at Shoesmiths?
Well, hello everyone. I'm kind of reassured that Beck has backed up with research a decision that we at Shoesmiths made really early on, actually, when COVID started to bite. Which was to harness hybrid and to acknowledge some of the benefits. Now, these are well rehearsed, but let's just remind ourselves. For my part, it's about diversity and inclusion. It's about working mums no longer feeling guilty, working dads no longer feeling guilty because they have to leave to do pickup. It's about environmental considerations. If we're travelling for 5 hours for a 1.5 hour meeting. Is that really right? No. There are massive cost savings. I mean, it was eye-watering how much we as a firm and many of our peer firms saved during the pandemic in terms of our travel costs. It's really questioned whether that is the right way forward. And it's also opened up, we talked about the pool of talent. It's opened up the pool of talent in a new way for us. It's opened up client opportunities for us. I can have seminars with people in China and Africa, time zones permitting. You know, it's very easy. I don't have to get on a plane to do that anymore. So there are huge advantages, and we wanted to harness hybrid. But in answer to your question, what does that really mean? Well, for us at Shoesmiths, it meant adopting some new working principles. And those working principles recognised again, I think this came out from Anne and Bex earlier, that everyone individually responds differently to a whole host of things, COVID notwithstanding. And that applies as much to how they work and how they work at their best. What we wanted to do was to allow people the flexibility and the freedom to be able to perform at their best. And that will be different for every individual. For some, it is coming into the office 5 days a week. For some, it might be staying at home for as much as they possibly can. But for the vast majority, it was that somewhere in between the two. And we wanted to allow that to happen. But equally, changing how we thought about that. 9 to 5:30 doesn't have to apply anymore. It could mean changing the working day, coming in for the morning and leaving. That's okay if we know that they're going to be back online later. So it was rethinking all of that. It was about output and not occupancy for us, trying once and for all to banish the cult of presenteeism. And we saw the results. Productivity went through the roof. Sickness absence went through the floor. You know, we cannot ignore those advantages. By the same token, we are all human beings and we love seeing each other. And equally, all of those things that we've also touched on today about, you know, how do we bring on the next generation? How do you mentor them? How do they train and develop without having that kind of exposure to people more experienced? How do we forge new relationships and build business? So it can't be a binary choice. It has to be a bit of both. And I think what we've learned is people can do their jobs at home, but they can't as easily build their careers at home. So it was about trying to find ways of achieving both. And yes, it has meant ripping out some desks. I think my co-head of office, Beth, is here. Hello. Beth has been ripping out desks and putting in some fabulous collaboration spaces and making it an exciting place to work. You know, people don't have to go into the office. We've got to make them want to go into the office. And actually, what I've loved about this whole process is us reimagining effectively the business case for cities, not creating it from scratch, just reminding people what a great place the city centre is. And it's that pull of the city centre that I hope will encourage our people to come back in greater number. But equally, I don't want to go back to the way it was before. There are so many. Nicola wants to ask me a question. I will let her.
You referred to the pool of talent and that it's far wider for you now to be able to pick up from. Obviously, that works the other way around as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a possibility of other cities reaching into our talent pool. What do you think that it is that we could be doing, whether it's a Shoesmiths idea or whether it's more a citywide, that makes that pool of talent not want to go and work for firms in London or firms in Manchester or across the world even?
It's a great question because, you know, we're not immune at all, and the city isn't immune to that brain drain. It's about creating an employee proposition that is second to none. It's about creating a city that is such a fantastically exciting place to be a young person working in and around the city centre. It is about creating all of those pulls and draws, 100%. But equally, if we do this right, if we harness it, because that seems to be where the majority of the demand is, we can really kind of lead the charge here. And for me, I don't mind where people are working. I really don't mind where they're working. If their spiritual home is Birmingham, then I'm happy, you know? And if they've got that nexus, and that's where they think of as, you know, this is my base, this is my tribe is Birmingham, then, you know, I think we'll have done a great thing. And I love the ideas that are in the report to do just that.
Okay, Martin, I'm going to come to you next. We talked about offices, talked about flexible, but generally we talk a lot in this report about the space, about making connections and about trying to open up the area. to more people, to the kind of people, freelancers, the level of businesses, the scale of businesses, the types of businesses that may not in the past have thought it was a place for them and they couldn't have afforded to come in. What do you see as the opportunities? What are the kind of connections that you can make in this area, the sort of wider central business district, actually a bit wider than Colmore, and what can we do different?
Okay, thanks, Kevin. I think when we were doing the research, it was pretty clear that there was a really good alignment between what the challenges were for the future of the future business district and what the opportunities were for everybody else who perhaps wasn't within the business district. So we basically identified that there are several groups which could all stand to or benefit from coordinating more closely, and that's something that we thought that the BID could do. You obviously have your workers, you have the businesses more largely, you have the hospitality sector, and you also have, which is almost a shadow group, which is the landlords, who obviously effectively own the business district, who are for the most part not represented in the BID or in a palpable way. I'm not sure if any of them are here today. So what we identified was that they all have pain points, whether it's, well, yeah, there we are, yeah. Just like that. They all have pain points, but those pain points can be eased by working more closely together. So what do I mean by that? So if you have an office, as Alex does, I think she has several probably, and there's space, you simultaneously also have people who would want to be in the business district, but it's too expensive. Right there you have an exchange opportunity where you can perhaps open these spaces up, have freelancers, smaller SMEs, charities come into the district, benefit from it, but also enrich it further. I think that's an incredible opportunity. One of the things that we discussed that the Curator General might do is lead the charge or create something like a hub or a tech platform where landlords, businesses can say, hey, I've got space or our shop is empty. And if there is a group or individuals within the district or beyond, they can take that space, they can be represented and they can contribute. I think the fact that we have gaps, whether it be time gaps or spatial gaps, we should see those as opportunities to diversify the business district. I think if we can do that, then we will have a richer, more vibrant, almost like a mosaic, rather than monolithic arrangement within a CBD. And I think that's the scale of the opportunity, and I think that's one of the ways that we can solve it, but of course there are others.
Okay, so.
David Barlow, Whitecap. I just, very, very compelling what you were just talking about there, because it's partly an observation, but partly a question as well, in terms of how much have you looked at the fusion from corporate to SME? Because my observation at the moment is that SMEs are back. SMEs like human interaction. There's been a much greater desire for that integration, that communication, the like, within the SME community than within the corporates. But it's so critical that we bring the two together. And I love the idea that we're talking about there in terms of getting those fusions of workspaces. How much have we considered the SME perspective within the research and the findings?
Not for you to defend the research, as it were, Martin, or answer it, but do you want to pick up that, and then I might come to you as well, Mike. But do you want to?
Well, yeah, I think we did consider the SMEs quite intensely, predominantly because Birmingham has the greatest number of startups outside of London. And I mean, also talking about startups and SMEs, we did also discuss the absence of venture capital, which doesn't quite make sense considering how prevalent and important fintech is in the city. It's almost invisible, yet it's punching well above its weight, and it's making real waves in a really meaningful way. And the fact that, as far as I know, there aren't any fintech startups represented in what is the engine of industry for our city doesn't quite make sense. So we really thought about that and saw that it's something we want to remedy very quickly.
Mike, do you want to add anything there? And then I will come to another question for you. But,
Yeah, sure. No, picking up on that point, you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that we mentioned, and I know Ian mentioned it in his speech, was we think that ultimately, if we're going to have a lot more people working hybrid, then the people who used to work in the district pre-pandemic are only going to come back in smaller proportions. So to get more people back in the city centre, we've got to attract other people. And so that's the businesses that aren't currently here, freelancers, we talked about social enterprises and so on and so forth. And, there are already lots of good ideas going around at the moment. I mean, we've got things like WeWork already in the city centre and Regis and that sort of thing. But, the little startup that we've got with Work From Here, which Joe and Tim have set up, creating space in hospitality venues for people to be working, to be able to come back into the city centre. That's a great idea, but I think we can do more of that, and we can start thinking about how bigger corporates can be using their space more imaginatively. And again, we've had conversations with some bigger businesses to say, well, actually, maybe we need to kind of create that ecosystem where we're getting our suppliers in, we're getting other businesses into the city centre to use our space in a more collaborative fashion. So you have, fewer desks, maybe a bigger sort of public area. And if we can get ground floors within buildings open to the public as well, then I think we can create much more interesting spaces for people to come into the city and use. And I think that's the opportunity where if there was a lack of confidence perhaps at the start of the study, the confidence that has grown over time is that, and we were challenged on this by Andrew Carter from Centre for Cities, was do we think that there'll be more people working and more businesses and more GVA generated out of the city centre, the business district in 10 years' time to now? And we think there will be, but it'll be different people. So it will be the big corporates, and there's some great new offices emerging out of the ground as we speak. I'm sure we can talk about those. But it's actually all those other little bits that are going to fill the gaps. And independence, I think, again, we've talked about independent businesses. And I like that idea about corporate stickiness that Bex mentioned, that the sense of belonging that people have to the city is really strong, but that's driven more by the connections with independent businesses and small businesses rather than feeling that there's a Pretz that they've got to come back and save.
So I'll come back to you in a second, Mike, but those new offices springing out of the ground, let's come to those. Rob Groves from Paradise, amongst many other things, and along with Balfour Beatty, represented today, two of our commercial partners in this project. Can I ask you two questions, Rob, rather unfairly? One is, you've been rolling out, as it were, Paradise has been emerging whilst the lockdown has been going on, which must have been probably not in the risk register, I'm guessing. What's that been like? And really to the points that Martin and Mike have been addressing, what do you notice already that's different in terms of demands and usage of office space and wider space?
Okay, it wasn't in the risk register, funny enough. But I think from our perspective, and I'm going to jump straight onto lettings, we've actually done a lot of lettings. And I think what happens, the UK are the best in the world at overreacting. When the pandemic came out and our press and the BBC, I could do whatever I could do. And I think there was the whole headlines of the office is dead. Well, it's not dead. And I think a lot of businesses pre-pandemic were already there. And I think the thing which is the hybrid working, I think it mixed with flex working. Because I think that there are slightly differences between the two. There were businesses, and the business I previously worked for wasn't flexible, because we've now changed business, as you may aware, and it was a fixed 9 till 6 every day. But any day you've done the hours that you need to do. There was no flexibility at all. And I think that's a very different thing to hybrid working. I mean, the two sort of join up, so I think we need to define that differently. So I think what's happened during the pandemic is a lot of businesses that were fixed, like the business I work for, I've now looked at that flexibility about doing the child run. So that's a massive plus and a big step forward. I think the exaggeration on the hybrid working is the office is dead. Well, we all know the office isn't dead. And I know from my own personal experience, I've learned more from sitting there, listening to my colleagues, nosing at their telephone conversations, the ones that still use telephones. But that's the reality of it. And when you look from a big business perspective, it's that cultural experience as well. So we're not going to get back to 5 days a week. Some people will do 5 days a week. I think the 1 or 2 days a week, I think it's going to be a struggle. Big businesses that take graduates on, how do they learn? You can't learn that from a Zoom call or a Microsoft call. So I think some businesses are already there, and I'm going to name PwC. They were already there. They made their corporate announcement early this year. They're not changing anything in terms of their office space requirement. Other businesses needed to get there. And I think that's the change. That's what's happened. It's been an acceleration of something which probably would have happened in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think that's what's happened. Yes, there will be less office space in the UK and probably most of the world as well in terms of the quantity required. And what we've seen during the pandemic, we haven't lost any tenants that we were talking to in spring last year. We signed them all up. Some have taken the space that they originally take. Some have reduced, driven down by their property sector. When you actually get to people, speak to people on the ground, they're actually saying, we haven't taken enough space, because the property people are chasing every square foot. But those that operate with their teams are recognizing, actually, we've gone too low. So we've had a combination of some that have just carried on and said, well, actually, we were already there. We were already looking at efficiency of use. We were already aware that you don't need a desk per person. But actually, so therefore, we're going to stick with our guns. There are some that have gone massive reaction, overreaction, massively reduced their requirement, and now coming, I wouldn't be at all surprised coming back to additional space for flex. I'm going to come back in 6 months' time and go, we haven't got enough space. Which I'll be saying, oh, that's fine, we can sort you out. So I think the hybrid thing and the flexible working is two different things. I think, the office needs to be a destination. So I'm going to go into all sorts of things. It needs to be a destination. And if any of you get the opportunity, please, if you're allowed to, get into PwC's office or DLA Piper's office and see the quality of the destination to make people want to get there. So that is really important. And, the term office, in a way, needs to disappear a little bit. It needs to be a place where everybody meets, collaboration spaces. Gone are the rows of white clinical spaces. That's changed. Also, and I'm going to say this biased, the city needs to be different and attractive as well. And it's the independents, particularly driven, dare I say, by people that are a bit younger than me, that are much more focused and they don't want to go to those certain chains. They want to go to something that's a little bit cooler, a little bit more independent. A lot of those are owned by chains, but it's the imagery, it's the fashionable bit. And it needs to be affordable as well. It's not about being exclusive. It needs to be inclusive. So I think the location of where your workplace is, it needs to be great, but equally there's still people want to step outside their office and actually go outside for a coffee during the working day. It's not just about the drinks in the evening, it's about the whole activity. So what you do around the Colmore BID, in terms of those independents, in terms of the cafe offers, it amazes me how busy cafes are. It's just, I can't believe it, but they all seem to thrive if you get the ingredient right. I think I've answered your questions.
And so much more, Rob.
Yeah.
I think Rob has probably got business cards on him if you need to take extra space.
I haven't got it yet.
And I should say, I will take your question, sir, and I should say, we're near to a drink, people. We're near to a drink. But I'm keen to take questions. I've got one more thing to ask Mike. But I should also say that one of the things in this report is this, we might have to rebrand it now, Rob, but is this idea of destination office. Because offices are destinations, as Rob says, that we want to show them off. We don't have a sort of coordinated way of showing them off and giving best practice. It's Martin's idea, by the way. I've just stolen it, like many of the things, I've written it up. So that's one of the things we want to do. Hey, Rob, I'm going to put you on the spot. Will you be the first signatory to a destination office tour, scheme, programme?
Yes.
Good. Ooh, that could have gone wrong. Sir, I'm going to take your question and then I'm going to come to Mike.
Thank you, Trevor Ivory, DLA Piper. And I probably ought to declare an interest. Rob is both my landlord and my client, so I think in all seriousness, sort of picking up really on what Rob does and also Mike, your point about independence. It's not the bread sandwich that got me back into Birmingham. It was the sourdough granary loaf from medicine that got me coming back, which you can't get that anywhere else. But it seems to me what you guys at Paradise have done well, and the big attraction for us of the space, and I'm very happy to show off the space to anyone who wants to come and have a tour, but it is that space between, and that's what Paradise is absolutely nailing, is the quality of the environment. My people aren't wanting to come back for the office, they're wanting to come back because they want to be eating in Dishu, they can't wait for Albert Schloss to open, they want the Vinoteca there, and that it's that experience that they're coming into the office for. And I think at Paradise, Rob, you've had the ability to do that, you've had that control over the space to be able to curate, which is one of the other words that's come out today. But that is a bigger challenge, isn't it, within the rest of the BID, where the ownerships are fragmented, where the City Council has a role that doesn't necessarily have the resource. How can the BID sort of start to unlock that and start to curate that experience that brings all of those benefits rather than just another Wetherspoons or just another whatever that isn't going to pull people back in.
Mike, that's got your name.
It certainly has, hasn't it? It made me think of two things, really. One was, given all that free advertorial, I think we can have some more money in the sponsorship pot for the study, if you don't mind. And that goes for you too, Trevor. But secondly, I mean, a really important point here, which is, those are great examples of what we've done well in the city. What I'm really interested in the study being the prompt for is doing that well across the city as a whole, because this isn't just about Colmore. We're very close to our other BID partners, and we want to roll out some of these ideas across the city centre. So it isn't just about making the business district great. It's actually those connections, and we talked, I know, about safety, and it really was high on the agenda. And I think that's a combination of things. That's people getting to the city safely, and there's still a lot of resistance to travelling on public transport at the moment, as we know. I think that will change over time, but people certainly don't want to be in the sort of sweaty commute at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, that's going to change the way people come into the city. But then getting around the city is the other really important thing. And I know the City Council have done good things, and there's some really great public realm schemes, but we've been talking about a lot of these for all of the dozen years that I've been on the BID board. We've got to accelerate the progress on making it safe to get around the city centre, and that's for I was in the city a few weeks ago for Pride, which was just a fantastic day, the first time I've been there, and it's just great to see the city that vibrant. And then within 2 weeks, we've got 2 really horrific attacks in Southside. So we've got to do more about public safety, and we've got to do more about being more responsive to our vulnerable communities as well. So getting people in, getting people around the city safely is really important, and then creating the sort of environment that is, yes, it's great for young people coming back into the city to work in offices, but it's also great for smaller businesses who want to come in and see that as being an opportunity for them, and that's about an inclusive approach to business. So I do think the business community has got to take a bit of responsibility for itself and say, actually, as I said earlier, the success of the business district has to go hand in hand with the success of the city and the wider region as well. So, if we can get more people seeing the city centre as somewhere that they can come, right from whether they're at school or going through college, and seeing a future. And I know we had this a few years ago with the Future City Commission or something like that. Getting people in and seeing a future for themselves in the city centre, whether it's in the BPFS sector or the creative sector or the hospitality sector, but making it inclusive and making it feel as though they can be part of that community and that success, I think is really important. So creating a better residential environment. We've already got lots of residents in the city, but we're going to see more in the future. We've got lots of developments, lots of potential conversions, and the city is going to be a place to live. It is going to be a 15-minute neighbourhood for those people. Tens of thousands of people potentially are going to live here as well. So I think it's great we're talking about hybrid working and things that will make the business district tick, but this study I don't think will lead to success unless we connect together all those disparate parts as well.
Okay. See, this is what, you get to the end of a Q&A session and suddenly all the hands keep going up. On the third row.
Hi, my name's Jodie. I work for Future Faces at the Chamber of Commerce. I was just wondering if the young professional network that I manage myself, is there a bridge that we can sort of, a niche that we can fulfil to get young people back into the city? Is that social side of that career sort of live? Can we offer that traction for them into the city? Can we help improve footfall that way?
So I'm going to ask you to answer that, Anita, and I know you wanted to make a point anyway. So
yeah, absolutely. If you're talking about young people and young people's network, there's been research which has shown that for mental health and mental well-being, young people are craving to get into the city centre. They need that context. So I think that you've got those networks have got a really important role to play. And actually, my point was going to be about the well-being. We haven't really discussed the health agenda here, because I think the health agenda is really important, and we need to get people back here, back working together, because people need people. There's a song, isn't there, that says so.
Don't start it now, though, Anita. We'll never get out of it.
But just one point from what's been happening happening in the cultural sector. You mentioned Pride Weekend. You look at the Hippodrome. You look at B Music ourselves. We did a capital project during lockdown, and we're very, very hesitant, thinking, will people really come back? Yes, the city footfall is 53%, but it didn't feel like that over that whole Pride Weekend. And our concerts are being booked and booked and booked, and we're struggling to get the staff now, to front of house staff, etc. So the cultural sector, people are coming in for concerts, for all kinds of cultural entertainment. So how can we as a BID, and how you as a BID, capitalise on that?
Yeah. Go on, Alex. Yep.
Sorry, because you absolutely touched on a little sweet spot for me of how you can mobilise young people, being passionate supporter of Future Faces and Birmingham Future, its previous incumbent. The biggest and most important role young people, I think, could play, certainly over the next 12, 18 months, of being ambassadors for this city, and really shouting about what a fantastic place it is. And when people are coming into the city next year with the Commonwealth Games, it's the young people that are going to bring that vibrancy and that energy and that excitement. So for me, that would be my plea to all of your members, to go out there and be great ambassadors for Birmingham.
I think your partner in crime, Alex, had a question. Yes? Oh, no, okay. All right. Satna, you're going to get the last word.
I just wanted to make an observational point with my ex-BBC hat on. Many a times I find myself in neighbourhoods around Birmingham where children have not been into the city centre. So the challenge is to the business community, how do we bridge that gap? It's not always about the starting point, bringing people into the city centre. There's something that needs to be done about taking the city centre out to them so they feel comfortable enough in the first place that it is truly an inclusive and democratic space for them.
Mike, why don't you pick up that, and then you are the last word from this panel.
Well, I couldn't agree more, yes. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to say, not quite so eloquently a moment ago, which is, I think, there's a recognition that having worked in the city centre for so long, and I think the point I heard earlier on about the audiences, 60% plus from outside the city, I think we've got to do something about that. Birmingham should, the city centre should reflect the city. And I suppose that's in its broadest sense beyond administrative boundaries. And it's not even a political point. We've got to make children in Birmingham feel like Birmingham is for them, and the city centre is part of that, whether it's the culture, whether it's the entertainment district, whether it's Southside, whether it's the jewellery quarter. If they want to aspire to stay in the city and work in the city and live in the city, then we've got to show them what their opportunities are. And if that means from a very young age us getting out there and talking to people and explaining what those opportunities are like, and then bringing them into an environment that's safe and feels positive and welcoming, I think that's really important. So if that's the last word, that's certainly a future business district that I'd like to see.
Okay, it is the last word. Ladies and gentlemen, please give your panel a round of applause. Thank you. So my thanks to the panel. That's the end of my bit. You'll be glad to know there's a lot to unpack, a lot to talk about. But I'll leave you with this. There are three drivers, really. If you remember nothing else from the last 17 hours we've been in this room together, if you remember nothing else, remember these three words. These are our drivers: to curate, to collaborate, and to connect. I will leave you in the capable hands of the chair of Colmore BID, the father of the bride's speech, Nicola Fleetmill.
I promise I'll be really quick. I know you all really want to have a drink. So for me, the thing that I've taken away from this the most today is this very exciting, well, it's gone now, the very exciting word curate, because for me, curation is about responsibility and really kind of taking, pardon the pun for Birmingham, but the bull by the horns. So I think that we all have a massive responsibility to look after our city. I've always been a huge ambassador for this city. It is my spiritual home. She knows this anyway. But I think this is one of the most important things for us. If we've all got to defend the brand 100% the whole way. So curation, if I didn't already have 3 jobs, I'd be applying for this job because I really think it sounds amazing. So anyway, on to the thank yous. So just finally, I know we've said this before, but I really just want to say thanks to these people. Thank you to City Ready, West Midlands Ready, at the University of Birmingham, supported by UK Research and Innovation. A huge thank you to our principal partners, Birmingham City Council and West Midlands Combined Authority. Thank you to our excellent supporters, Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP, MEPC and Balfour Beatty. Our colleagues from my fellow bids, so Westside Retail, Southside and JQ, play a very, very important role in this city. As thank you to our impressive panel. You've all been wonderful, led by the dynamic Alex Bishop. And thank you to everyone who's taken part. So those who have sent in ideas, those who've sat in workshops, sent in internal studies from their own firms, or given up their time to converse with the team. Thank you very much. Today has been the launch of a vision. A lot of evidence has gone into it and a variety of recommendations, but those of you who know me know I do not like a report that goes up on the shelf. We're not about lining bookshelves here. This is only the beginning. We need engagement now. We need people to translate these ideas and many more into action. So crucially, it's not for the shelf. It has to be the start of a movement, the start of the change we want to see in this city for this city. So let's make the city's business districts even more fit for the future through more active curation, through harnessing hybrid solutions, and through diversifying our offerings as people live and work more flexibly. Please stay for drinks and nibbles for the next hour or so. And please do ask questions, pose ideas, and become a part of this ongoing journey. Thank you very much, everyone.